That morning, when I opened my eyes, the black flag was already waving atop the eastern tower. It was the 6th day of Thorn Month, an old name, nearly forgotten, but one that lingered in our lands since before the unification. And whenever that banner rose, we knew something had been taken from us. No one dared ask what. Over time, we'd learned that silence meant survival. The castle woke before the sun on days like this. Servants whispering among themselves, hurried footsteps, eyes that avoided mine. Fear hung in the air itself, as if the stones knew the Duke had spoken. And when Marcus Durham spoke, the world obeyed. He didn't shout. He never needed to. A new parchment nailed to the town square gate, and a legion of dark-cloaked riders were enough to ensure no one tore it down. My father, Grand Governor Andrew Lancaster, had kept this land free for decades. He was a man of steady words and calm eyes, who governed with councils, assemblies, and an open ear. There was balance, there was voice, there was respect. But then he fell ill, and then he vanished. Some say it was fever. Others whisper poison. I don't know what happened, only that he was gone too quickly, too quietly, surrounded by men bearing Marcus Durham's crest on their chests. And before his body even cooled, Marcus had claimed the seat of command, swearing loyalty to a distant crown that never dared meddle directly in our affairs. He called himself a temporary regent, promising to rule until I was old enough to take over. But years passed, and with them came the decrees. One by one, they slashed away everything my father had built, the village's right to speak, positions, earned by merit, free education. And then came that decree, the cruelest of all. On the morning of the Black Flag, women were forbidden from studying, inheriting, or speaking in public assemblies. The justification was flimsy, tied up in words like safety, order, and restoring tradition. But everyone knew it was control. It was erasure. It was the final attempt to snuff out any spark my father might have left in me. Until then, I'd stayed silent, pretending time would bring justice, pretending obedience was strategy, pretending my patience wasn't cowardice. But that day, when I saw my old tutor, a white-haired woman who taught me to think when no one else dared, dragged from the library, something inside me snapped, not with screams, with a decision. Hours later, amidst nobles and knights, I stood. The council chamber froze, eyes turned to me like blades. The Duke, seated on the makeshift throne he called the Chair of Stability, raised an eyebrow, and I spoke, with a steady voice, with all the Lancaster blood burning in my veins. This decree is a lie, an insult, a slow poison to this land, and as long as my name is Agatha Lancaster, it will never be accepted. The room didn't breathe. Lords and ladies lowered their gazes. The Duke didn't. He stared at me for a long moment, without anger, without haste. Then he rose, and with the calmest tone I'd ever heard, he said only, "Very well, my lady. May your courage match the consequences." And then I knew. The war wouldn't come with swords and drums. It would come with whispers, locked doors, broken alliances. And the name that had protected me for years was now the one he'd try to destroy. That night no one came for me. No guards at the door, no immediate lash, no formal accusations, just silence. A thick silence, full of eyes hidden behind tapestries and corridors too long to be empty. I dined alone. A plate left by hands that didn't want to be seen, a goblet of wine darker than usual. I didn't touch it. The air carried the same tension as a forest awaiting a storm. But there were no thunderclaps, just the weight of waiting. I wandered the halls like a misplaced shadow. The castle where I was born, where my father once paced with arms crossed and dreamy eyes, felt foreign. The air was colder. the walls tighter. The faces, when they appeared, watched me with a mix of pity and dread. They knew I'd crossed an invisible line. I was no longer the young girl shielded by a strong name. I was a piece off the board, or rather, a piece that had moved on its own. When I returned to my chambers, the window was open, and on the table lay a folded parchment with a seal that belonged neither to House Lancaster nor the Duke's authority. I broke it open. The handwriting was bold, like someone writing in haste, but with control. "They still remember your father," read the first line, "and more are willing to hear your voice than you realize." Below, a symbol, 3 swords entwined in a circle, a forgotten crest once used by the protectors of the western frontier, wiped out after Marcus's rise. My heart raced, not from fear, from recognition. Days of nameless roads followed, passing through hamlets where bells no longer rang and faces bore the weariness of generations. Some recognized me, not by name, but by my father's features, still alive in me like a stubborn memory. Others offered water and silence. No one asked questions, as if they all knew too many questions could be dangerous. At night, I read Thomas's book by the short flame of a candle. The maps were outdated, but my father's notes didn't lie. He'd known the system's cracks long before they became chasms. Every line he wrote was a warning's echo, a whispered call to rise. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a resistance architect, and now I walked on the foundations he'd left behind. One morning I woke to someone watching me. A tall man with hair dark as the southern riverbank mud, holding a gnarled wooden staff and wearing a simple cloak. He didn't give his name, just said, "You've reached where you're meant to be." Behind him came 2 others, a woman with steel eyes and a boy who barely looked 20 summers old. They led me through hidden trails, paths absent from any official map. On the 3rd day, we crossed a stone ravine that bridged forgotten territories. And there, in an old sanctuary turned shelter, I met what remained of the resistance. They were fewer than I'd expected, and far more than I could grasp. They weren't soldiers. They were farmers, craftsmen, healers, former students of the university Marcus had shut down, exiled advisors, children of families punished for defiance. All shared one thing. They'd lost something. Land, name, voice, blood. But none had lost the will to resist. They didn't greet me as a princess or bow as an heiress. They looked at me as if trying to see if I was real. And I looked at myself the same way, from the inside out, as someone still taking shape amid ruins. That night, I sat by the central fire and told them everything. Every word spoken to the Duke, every decree burning in my throat, every memory of my father that now made sense. They didn't interrupt, they didn't cheer. But when I finished, the woman with steel eyes stood and said, "So Lancaster's daughter has finally bled." And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be there. I wasn't a symbol. I wasn't noble blood. I was someone who'd been broken and still chose to stay whole. Time there didn't follow the rhythm of castles. Days were measured in small, essential acts. I learned to live without the comforts tied to my name, to listen more than speak, to watch the patterns of a people who'd learned to survive on scraps, yet still dreamed of harvests. And as I learned to clean wounds and ration food, I learned something else. Courage builds in silence, far from stages. It isn't born in speeches. It's born in the repetition of steps, even when the ground threatens to give way. And on that ground, among those with everything to lose and nothing left to offer but their convictions, I began to understand who I was. Not Andrew Lancaster's daughter, not the Duke's traitor, but Agatha, a woman of living voice, heir to a collective pain, forged by the iron of a system that tried to silence me and failed. And the strangest thing was there among them, I never had to shout. They were already listening. The months that followed were a forge. Each day in the resistance camp stripped away another piece of the Agatha shaped by the castle. I shed the dresses sewn by noble hands, the rings with crests, the rigid posture of someone raised to look worthy, and in their place I learned to stitch my own cloak, wield a dagger without hesitation, dig with my bare hands the trench that would protect next season's food. It wasn't humiliation, it was freedom. For the first time, everything I did wasn't a gesture for show. It was real. It was necessary. There was a rhythm there, a collective pulse that taught me the value of shared silence. Words came only when they carried weight. No one wasted breath, and when they spoke, it was with the pain of those who'd lost too much. My ears opened like never before, and I listened. I heard Nora's story, who watched her husband hanged for hiding banned books. I heard Elias's whispers, who lost his sight in a northern field attack, yet could guide fighters through the woods better than anyone. I heard Mel's dry laugh, the same woman with steel eyes who said the only thing more dangerous than Marcus's. Blade was a woman who refused to stay quiet. It was with her I trained. Mel was practical, tough, with no patience for speeches. The first time I held a sword in front of her, she laughed, said my stance was good, but my wrist shook like a startled bird's. She didn't spare me falls or bruises, and she didn't praise me when I improved, just kept going. Until one day, without warning, she knocked me down, pressed the hilt of her blade to my throat, and whispered, "You'll only know who you are when you stop trying to look invincible." Then she stood and left me there, lying, sweating, gasping, not from pain, but from shame and relief. That night, I cried alone, not from weakness, but because I was finally making room inside myself to let go. And only then could I start rebuilding by my own will with the pieces I chose to carry. News trickled in slowly through messengers with sharp eyes and light steps. Durham was tightening border patrols, arresting anyone who spoke the Lancaster name in public squares. He made a point of rewriting my story, the rebel princess, the ungrateful daughter, the woman driven mad by ambition. Soon rumors spread that I'd fled with a mercenary army, that I was gathering forces overseas, that I'd sworn to destroy all symbols of the order. And the more he spread those lies, the more whispers grew among the people. Because every rumor carries a spark of faith, and people were starting to believe, not because they knew me, but because they needed something to break the cycle. One overcast afternoon, while we moved supplies between mountain hideouts, a scout arrived out of breath. He said the Duke's men had captured a messenger on the eastern trails, that he carried a name, mine, along with a sealed letter. Thomas, my old advisor, the one who gave me my father's book. He was held at Black Watch Post, a remote fort, where no one leaves without confessing. For hours the camp debated. Attacking would be suicide. Waiting, cowardice. Mel looked at me and said what no one else dared. He risked it for you. Not your title, but the seed you planted here. It was the first time I grasped what my presence had become. I wasn't just an inspiration piece. I was a living link, and a living link, if broken, weakens the whole chain. That night, as the trees whispered their decisions, and the wind grew more restless than ever, I sat alone with my father's journal open in my lap. The handwritten pages were stained by dirt, time, and my own tears. I read a passage he wrote in the days before his death. If you're ever forced to flee, don't flee to survive. Flee to gather, flee to learn, and then return. The words burned my skin because I knew, with the same certainty as I knew I breathed, I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore, not because I wanted to be seen, but because now every face around me bore the risk I'd provoked, and fleeing was no longer an option. The next morning, as the sun barely pierced the fog, I left the camp with my cloak tied tight and the training sword slung across my back. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note, not out of pride, but necessity. Some things had to be done in silence, away from eyes that might stop me out of love or fear. I knew the way to Blackwatch Post. It was marked on a secret page. In my father's journal, alongside coded notes about the underground tunnels, the number of guards, and a symbol next to Thomas's name, a circle with a dot in the center. It was the mark he used when he was still the realm's master of information, before swearing allegiance to the Duke in exchange for time. Time to protect me. Time to prepare what was now mine to finish. The journey took 2 days. Intermittent, rain, mud to my knees, hands blistered from cold and effort. And still, each step made me steadier, as if the distance between who I was and who I needed to be was finally closing. When I reached the hill overlooking the fort, I crouched in the game, wet earth, took a deep breath, and let the world around me quiet. The structure was smaller than I remembered, but no less daunting. High walls, double gates, 2 fixed sentries, and at least 6 men patrolling outside. No way to enter unseen. But what they didn't know was that I didn't plan to sneak in. That night, under torchlight shadows and the bite of freezing air, I descended the hill with my head high. I walked to the main gate with firm steps, hood down. One guard saw me, hesitated, then stepped back when he recognized my face. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just said, with the voice full of the authority the Duke tried to erase, "My name is Agatha Lancaster. I'm here to take my advisor back. If you want to arrest me for it, do it with a clear conscience." The other guards stammered, and in the next second, doors flew open with haste and shouts echoed inside. I was led into the inner hall under pointed spears. Men surrounded me, confused, restless. And then he appeared, Lord Harwin, the fort's commander, a broad-shouldered man with small eyes, who once swore loyalty to my father but now wore the Duke's colors with conviction. He looked at me like I was a ghost and said, "So it's true. The heiress breathes." I smiled without humor and walks. The minutes that followed were a bloodless knife game, sharp words, veiled threats. But I didn't bend. And the more I spoke, the more the men around me seemed split between doubt and shame. Until I heard footsteps behind me, and then Thomas's voice, weak, hoarse, but alive. "She's telling the truth, and you know it," Harwin faltered. For the first time I saw the mask of certainty waver on his face. He could jail me, of course. He could order my execution right there, as a warning to the people. But something in his eyes said the fear of making me a martyr outweighed the desire to silence me. And then, in an unexpected move, he lowered his gaze and said, "Take him. But if you step foot in this fort again, Agatha, let there be no mercy." I nodded. And with Thomas leaning on my shoulder, we left Blackwatch without bloodshed, but with rumors spreading, because we knew that night couldn't be hidden, and that's what I wanted. Back at the camp, they greeted us with wide eyes. No one expected me to return, much less with Thomas walking, even frail. And in that moment something shifted, not just in me, but in everyone around, as if seeing me defy the impossible and come back alive, they finally believed something greater was being born, and it was no longer just a seed. That night, Mel pulled me aside, and for the first time in ages, smiled. A small, tired, but real smile. "You made too much noise, Lancaster," she said. Now he's coming, and I knew. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It wasn't about surviving. It was about being seen, being a flame. Because the Duke knew now that I had a voice, that I had people, and that I'd return. Not for revenge, but because, after everything, Andrew Lancaster's daughter finally understood what it means to not just bear a name, but earn it. When the first messenger arrived, we were ready. The Duke's seal cracked on the parchment, the ink still fresh, the tone calculated. A summons, or rather a performance. Marcus called me to the capital to publicly discuss recent developments and restore balance between the crown's representatives and the people's interests. Pretty words laced with poison. I read between the lines. He wanted to expose me, to diminish me before the entire realm's eyes, to undo the strength I'd built with sweat and dirt under my boots. It was an invitation masked as a trap, and it was perfect, because it was exactly what I needed. There was no hiding it. The news spread faster than any official decree. The governor's daughter would return to Thornhall. The halls would reopen. The council would convene after nearly 4 years without public sessions. It was theater, yes, but to the people it was more. It was a chance. The Lancaster name would be spoken again amid marble and velvet. And if Marcus thought the capital's shine would break me, it's because he never understood where my strength came from. Not from lineage, from mud, from loss, from the shout that ripens inside silence. We left in 3 days. I didn't take nights. I took names. Beside me, Mel, Nora, Elias, and a boy no one knew the origins of, but who knew every curve of the land like he was born from it. They weren't escorts. They were witnesses. We didn't march in defiance. We marched like people coming home. Entering Thornhall was like crossing a pass with the eyes of a survivor. The walls were taller, the gates higher. The house windows seemed to look down, as if afraid to see too much. The streets were too clean, too quiet, and the square, once alive, now felt like a stage set for sacrifice. But no one stopped us. The guards knew. This war wasn't about swords anymore. It was about eyes. In the hall, the Duke waited with that same look, calm, hollow, lethal, surrounded by the men he'd planted like seeds of obedience. His private council, the same ones who helped dismantle my father's structure of voice. But there was something different in him now, a tightness in his jaw, a slight tremor in his fingers, an extra beat between words. He smiled, but he didn't rest, because he knew. I'd returned and I hadn't come alone. The first hours of the hearing were false courtesies, measured words, empty promises, an attempt to reduce me to a repentant daughter. I let him talk. I listened like someone hearing the end of a season, and when my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke with the steadiness of someone carrying 100 voices within. I named those erased from the books. I recalled laws torn up in silence. I pointed unflinching at those who'd grown rich off fear. And when I mentioned my father, I made each syllable a stone hurled at the walls of the Duke's narrative. He interrupted me, tried to laugh, tried to deflect, tried to call me a dreamer. And that's when I rose from my chair, pulled the old Lancaster crest I'd kept pinned beneath my tunic, and held it high. Behind me, Mel did the same. Then Elias. Then the others. And then, amid the silence of the columns and the weight of history, I saw one of the Duke's counselors lower his eyes, then another and another. There was no shout, no direct clash, but in that instant he knew. His authority was no longer whole. In the days that followed, pressure on Thornhall grew. Neighboring villages refused to send tribute. Letters of support began to appear. Parts of the guard refused to suppress protests. The structure began to buckle, not by force, but by internal fracture. Marcus tried to react, tried to contain, tried to promise. But the people had heard another voice, and more importantly, they'd remembered their own. When he finally left the throne, it wasn't with ceremony, it was with silence. It was with doors closing behind him and no salute of loyalty. He vanished from the capital like a shadow that lost its light source. And in his place, there was a void. But not for long. I didn't take the crown. Not in the old way. We rebuilt the council, this time with open seats, diverse voices, public votes. We made the meetings accessible to all. The Lancaster name returned to the records, but not as an inheritance, as a foundation. I didn't sit alone on any throne. I sat among the others. And every time someone tries to call me princess, I smile, because I wasn't born to be a princess. I was reborn to be a voice. Today, the council hall has open windows. Sunlight streams in uninvited, and the winds carry the murmurs of the city outside, life pulsing where fear once reigned. Sometimes I sit on the stone bench beneath the courtyard fig tree and watch the faces passing through the halls. Youths with eyes bright with questions, elders with hands calloused by memory, women who were once shadows and now claim their rightful places. No one bows their head when they speak. No one waits for others to decide for them. And amid it all, I let myself breathe. The Lancaster name is still spoken with reverence in some corners, but it's become less mine and more everyone's. It's etched in squares, in archives, in songs sung by the hearth, not as a mark of noble blood, but as a reminder that even the mightiest names must earn their memory. Mel leads the civil guard with her stern voice and eyes that still read intentions before words. Elias, though blind, guides travelers from distant lands, eager to learn how we rose from ashes. Thomas smiles more now. He lives among the shelves of the rebuilt library, where books breathe aloud again. And me? I write. I record everything. The decisions, the mistakes, the victories, because I've learned, after all, that words are the first weapon against tyranny, and the last bridge between who we were and who we choose to be. Sometimes, on nights when the rain beats hard against the windows and the past insists on visiting, I return to my father's journal. The pages are worn, some nearly crumbling, but the words are still there. And every time I read, I feel he never truly left. He just came to exist in another way. In me, in the people, in the land he believed. Truth could free, and that together we freed with courage. There are no glorious endings, no absolute peace, but there's continuity. There are steady hands steering the present. There are roots, and there are fruits. My name is Agatha Lancaster, and if anyone ever tries to erase this story, let them know now there are many voices now, and none will fall silent.